Hello and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. Today I will be talking about the ghost who walks himself, the immortal, the original hero, the Phantom, created by Lee Falk and first published in newspaper strips in 1936 and still ongoing to this very day and popular throughout the world, though unfortunately not as much in the US here as one would hope. So I always feel like a bit of definitely a Phantom fan sort of trying to fly the flag a bit here in the U.S. as opposed to where the Ghost Who Walks is much more popular in, say, for example, Australia and Sweden. But I wanted to talk about some books I've wanted to read for ages, which are, of course, the Avon paperback novels from the 1970s. So this is Volume 1, basically retelling the origin of the Phantom. This is the Hermes Press reprint, and I took the plunge and purchased the whole set because they have done all 15 books originally published by Avon in the 70s that are all long out of print and nice little collector's items that usually cost a little bit. So they had a site sale not too long ago, and they had a bundle of all of them together. So I figured I've wanted to read these for so long, and their stuff doesn't stay in print forever. So they usually do. They've done most of the key comics. They've done nice hardcover reprints of, and also they've been doing the original newspaper strips for some time. They're up to a good number of volumes now, and those are the older editions are unfortunately out of print. I have read a number of the original strips, and of course the series is still going to this day, but I've only been sort of on the fringes. I wouldn't call myself particularly an expert, so I was very curious to come to the novels, which sort of, you could look at them perhaps as sort of a novelization because they are based on and expanding upon the original story arcs in the original newspaper strips. So if you're very familiar with those, you'd be able to recognize which points the novels are based on. So this original volume by Lee Falk himself is, you have the creator of the Phantom writing the origin down in novel form. And what's fascinating about this is, while it hits the same beats that I think most people would be at least familiar with, for those who at least know a little bit about the Phantom and his background, about the origin story of the Phantom, that stuff is here. But what is really fascinating is how the lore is filled out by having almost, they're not quite flashbacks, but they're basically the various stories that are told about phantoms of the past. And so you get entire bits of background about the character of the Ghost Who Walks and the nature of the Phantom through these stories of different phantoms over time. So the amount of world building that goes on here in this book is really excellent, and that's combined with the trademark really wonderful, good-spirited nature of all that really should be inherent in all Phantom stories, and was part and parcel with Lee Falk's, and his entire writing career, particularly with the Phantom. So I think it speaks volumes that you have the actual original creator and original writer himself rewriting the origin story, but expanded upon in novel form. And I really like those additional bits of the stories of the previous Phantoms. I'm not entirely sure if all of these have appeared in the strips, because I have not read all of them, and that since they started in the 1930s, there are quite a number of them to go over. So again, this is more of just a general Phantom fan's perspective. But I really enjoyed the heck out of reading this. It's not particularly very long, so you will breeze through this rather quickly, but this is one of those books that you just want to take a little bit more time reading because it's so darn enjoyable. So for those who are not familiar, the character of the Phantom is a masked vigilante, if you will, a do-gooder for justice for all peoples, and it is a mantle that is passed down from father to son across generations. We follow the 21st Phantom, Kit Walker, in the 20th century, but again, you have the stories of his father and the past Phantoms stretching all the way back to the origin of the Phantom, when the original character was a young boy aboard a ship with his father, and they were attacked by pirates, and his father was murdered in front of his very eyes. Manages to be the only survivor of the shipwreck, and with the help of the native tribe who rescues him and nurses him back to health, decides to swear vengeance upon evildoers, and that basically his entire lineage and family will continue this crusade throughout time. And of course, the singular image is he swears this on the skull of his father's murderer, which I've always loved. It's one of the great images of superhero origins. And of course, the Phantom is really part of the core group of pulp characters of the 1930s that forms the basis of the entirety of superhero comics and superheroes in general, vigilantes, whatever term you want to use. Everything that's popular now and that people love, if you go back to where all this stuff started, the real core group is in the 1930s. The Phantom is often credited as perhaps being the very first costumed superhero character, with his origin in 1936, predating both Batman and Superman by a good number of years. So you basically have the Phantom along with the other characters of the newspaper strips that sort of formulate into this, along with Mandrake the Magician, which Lee Falk also created, alongside the other adventure characters like Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers, and of course the big names of the pulp magazines in the Shadow and Doc Savage, among many, many others. So when you read the Phantom and you experience more Phantom stories, you can see where all of this stuff came to fruition. And the great thing about the Phantom is the character has never lost, or the writers, I should say, and those in charge of things usually have a good sense of trying to keep on track with the original sort of core mandate of the character, and keeping some of that good-spirited nature along with updating things where it needs to be. And of course, having the lineage of the character, you can go into the future and you can update it, and you can update things for the times. The other interesting thing is if you read some reprints or some later stories and things, they have, and Lee Falk was somebody who did this as well and really focused on trying to make sure that the character and his world and all the stories were very all-inclusive, that no one was left out. And they're not, if you read some of these and you read the novels as well and the original strips, they're nowhere near as dated as some of their contemporaries. If you read a lot of pulp materials from the 30s, you're going to encounter all kinds of things, from casual racism to outdated stereotypes and things like that. Thankfully, you don't really get that in the Phantom stories. And again, I've only read some of the strips, but compared to other things of that same time period, they are much more ahead of their time. And I think that also fits into the Phantom being much more of a crusader for all peoples, and that's something that has always attracted me to the character. And I think a lot of people, and that's why the Ghost Who Walks is still beloved around the world. So again, this book is basically the series creator, Lee Falk, coming back to retell the origin story and expand it upon in book form. Now, Avon did these in the 70s when adventure paperbacks and for what was starting to be termed the men's adventure paperbacks had really started to gestate and take off. They would become really huge in the 70s into the 80s, and their influence sort of went into different genres and could be felt in a lot of different areas of publishing. So when you look at these, they all have this beautiful, gorgeous, very pulpy artwork. This is really trying to play up trying to draw people's eyes, so it's really playing up the sex and violence, as any great pulp cover is going to do. But when you read this, you get a lot of two-fisted goodness and fisticuffs and daring do and things, but it's never quite as vivid in your face as the very beautifully pulpy cover would have you believe. Hermes has also put a little bit of the rear cover art on the back and made these nice matching rear covers, which I really enjoy. So they use elements of the front cover. Now, these were originally smaller paperbacks, and I only have one of the originals, but just to give you the size difference, so here is an original Avon paperback of book 13, just to give you the size difference. So what Hermes has done is actually printed this oversized edition that is basically like a slightly larger trade paperback, not quite a full, comic graphic novel size, but somewhere in between. And it has a really nice, almost, it's not quite textured, but it has a little bit of texture to it. And it feels very solid in the hand. So this is a really nice printing, I have to say, even if it's obviously bigger than a traditional paperback. The text is really nicely laid out, very easy to read. There's not a lot of dead space in the margins like you get in some fancier printings where they make a book bigger simply to charge more because it's a bigger trade paperback or something. Again, this clocks in at about 100. It's literally 158 pages, and it's such an enjoyable read that I think it's essential for all Phantom fans and anybody interested in the character. This would be a great way to get involved with the character and his world because all the major players are introduced. You get the origin of the Phantom, you get the setting of the jungle country of Bengala, you get the Skull Cave, which is the Phantom's lair, you get to know a little bit about the Jungle Patrol, you get introduced to the side characters of Guran and, of course, the tribe that protects and essentially surrounds the Phantom, and, of course, you get introduced to the love interest of Diana Palmer, who is the Phantom's great love and appears in and out of the stories. So basically, the entire cast of characters is introduced well, and it's allowed to build over time, and you get the full origin of the Phantom, and you really get to like this character. You get to know Kit Walker, and you get to see him develop from early childhood all the way up to when he matures as an adult and has to take over the mantle of the Phantom from his father. It's also nicely done that all of the wealth of the Phantom's skills, how these skills are acquired, how the Phantom is a mixture of detective and vigilante and all kinds of different things. You get basically the setup for every core element of the Phantom and how the Phantom operates and why the Phantom exists. It's really well laid out here. Nothing feels forced. And again, having those background stories of Phantoms of the past really help to flesh out the core nature of the Phantom's mission. I just had so much fun reading this, and it's so well written. It has a wonderful charm to it that I couldn't help but continually keep grinning while I'm reading this, even though I knew the basic, the background, the basic or standard origin of the Phantom. I've only read some of the early strips, and so getting all of that material fleshed out here, also with those wonderful background stories of past Phantoms, it was just a lot of fun, and I will enjoy coming back and rereading this all the time. So that's why I wanted to talk about it in video form, and also because I really like what Hermes Press did with these. Again, they have done all 15 books, so they all have the original art recreated in this larger, more premium feeling size. The list price on these is $14.99, but they do sell a bundle pack on their website. I'm not sure if it has sold out by now, but you still can get all the individual volumes on there, and I would recommend ordering directly from Hermes because it's always better to support an independent publisher, and also the availability of these and other Hermes books and Phantom releases on other retailer websites. It's kind of spotty. Some of them are available on Amazon, others aren't. So it's always best to order directly from the publisher, and I'll have the link in the description below if you're interested in these. But this was just so much fun, and I really enjoyed it because getting the original printings, I've only seen this one copy before in a used bookstore, and when you look these up on eBay or online retailers, they can get quite pricey. And if you were to piece together an entire 15-book set, even in decent condition, you're probably going to be spending anywhere between $50 and $100. I found this a little while ago in decent shape, and it was it mixed in with a bunch of bargain paperbacks, so I was excited to finally find one of these, and I that's why I decided to just go ahead and go full tilt and get the whole bundle on the Hermes website. These are, of course, the original vintage paperback. They had the nice classic red line edges, and if you are a purist or you really love classic paperbacks like I do, these are still really wonderful paperbacks to have, but Hermes has really gone the extra mile, and it's kind of a no-brainer to just go ahead and spring for getting all of the reprints if you can't find the originals at a decent price, because they are, I mean, they're not super expensive, and you could probably piece together a whole set, but you'd have to buy them individually, and it would take a lot of time. And if there's ever a lot or a complete set of vintage copies, they can get pretty pricey. So that's why I recommend just going ahead and going with the lovely reprints that Hermes has done. So those are my thoughts on the Hermes Press reprint of the original first Avon novel based on the classic Phantom stories, which is creator Lee Falk rewriting the origin of the Phantom and expanding it into novel form. As someone who really enjoys the book format for comic characters, I really hate that it's something that isn't often done, and usually it's only novelizations of films, or there's a handful of novel adaptations of bigger or more famous comic story arcs. And when those exist, or the occasional original novel, I get really excited, and I really enjoy the characters in longer form stories, as opposed to always having just the standard comic. So when I found that the Phantom had not one, but an entire series of 15 novels back in the 70s that were based around original stories and stories from the comic strips, and several were actually written by Lee Falk himself, I was like, okay, I have to read these somehow. And then I realized I would have to start tracking them down, and then eventually I discovered about the Hermes reprints, and eventually they did all of them. So I'm so happy I took the plunge with these, because the quality is really nice on them. And the price isn't too bad, especially when you consider how much it would cost to piece together a vintage set of all the Avon paperbacks. So either way you go with these, they're so much fun. And this one in particular is really special because, again, you have the creator and primary writer of the whole Phantom universe getting to expand upon the origin story in book form. And as someone who enjoys novelizations and these characters in book form, it was just an absolute treat. So for all Phantom fans, if you've not checked out the Avon books, I would highly suggest it. If you're interested in the character and you've never read any Phantom stories, or you didn't know where to start, this would be a great place. And I think if this grabs you, I think you'll be a Phantom fan for life. It's a wonderful starting off point. I wish I'd had this growing up when I was deprived of Phantom materials after the 96 film and the Phantom 2040 series. I was left wanting more Phantom, and there was no Phantom here in the US, and it drove me crazy. So I'm so glad that this stuff now exists, and it's at least accessible to us here in the US. So I highly recommend these. They are wonderful reprints. And again, I will leave the link to Hermes' website in the description below. If you love these books as much as I'm really enjoying them, I would love to hear your thoughts. Maybe if you have some thoughts on how they compare to the original strips they're based on, or other favorite Phantom stories. I'm always looking for recommendations because I sort of dabble in all kinds of different Phantom items and comics and various stories and different things. It's sort of all over the place because unfortunately here in the U.S. the character is has much more of a niche fandom, and there are also so many original Phantom stories that are published in other countries and other languages. So of course I would love to read those, but unfortunately I can't speak the language. But I can look at and read about them online at least. But there are a lot of materials out there that aren't the easiest to get here in the U.S. So I'm so grateful that we do have these nice reprints from Hermes, and I wish I had found out about them sooner, so I had been able to get some of the newspaper strip collections and some of the comic collections they've done before they've gone out of print and become collector's items. But in any case, I do highly recommend the Phantom Avon novels. They're a load of fun, and they're really a sort of throwback to several different eras. They are, of course, the character that started in the 1930s, but they're also they also have one foot in the sort of 70s adventure paperback era of publishing history. So they sort of straddle those two different eras, which is a real fascinating approach because you have the heart of the character from the 30s, and it's sort of packaged and sold for a 70s adventure pulpy paperback market, which I just thought was a really fascinating thing to have those two different sides of publishing eras. So that's why I think these are so fascinating, and they're just really wonderful stories. So I hope this has been at least somewhat fun and informative, and I do want to cover the rest of the Avon books. I've read the first couple so far, so I wanted to do a little video about all of them because it's I don't get to talk about the Phantom very much, and I've wanted to do some various Phantom videos on this channel, and I figured this might be an interesting place to start. So if you're interested, I do highly recommend the Hermes Press reprint series of the Avon Phantom novels. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.